That's Pretty Clever, or Ganz Schön Clever, by Stronghold Games, is a dice roll and write style game. The basic premise is that each player will take a turn rolling their dice, choosing 3 and marking them on their scorecard, then the other players, the passive players, choose one of the dice not taken by the active player, and mark that on their scorecard, then they switch. The player who gets the most points on their scorecard at the end of the last round wins. This game can be played with 1 to 4 players, it lasts 6 rounds with 1 to 2 players, 5 rounds with 3 players, and 4 rounds with 4 players. Each round features every player taking turns being either the active player, or the passive player. One person is chosen to be the active player to start, all other players are passive, then the next player becomes the active player, and all other players are passive, and the cycle repeats. Once every player has been an active player, you move on to the second round, and so on. The active player rolls the 6 dice, then picks one. Any dice lower in value than the one they pick, but not equal, will be placed on the silver platter, where the active player won't have access to them. The dice they pick is placed on their scorecard. The player re-rolls the remaining dice, the ones not on the scorecard or silver platter. The player chooses a second dice, puts it on their scorecard, and any lower valued dice on the silver platter. Then the player repeats the process one final time, any remaining, unchosen dice are placed on the silver platter. In total the active player has chosen 3 dice, and placed 3 dice on the silver platter. If the active player runs out of dice, by taking too high a value of a dice, and being forced to place all the remaining dice on the silver platter, too bad. Since you only place the dice of lower value on the silver platter, choosing a die with a value of 1, will cause 0 dice to be placed on the silver platter. Once the active player has chosen their dice, each of the passive players may choose 1 die from the silver platter. If none of the dice are usable to them, they may take 1 from the active player. Multiple players can choose the same die, and choosing a die has no direct impact on any player. Using the dice they have collected, players can cross off squares that match with the color of dice they picked up. Each dice crosses off a square in each section. There are 5 different sections, that correspond with 5 different dice of the same color. A square can only be crossed off by use of a bonus, or by playing a dice. The yellow section has multiple rows and columns of squares, each square has a number on it. A die can be used to cross off a square with the value of the die on it. 4 of the squares are already crossed off, in the upright diagonal. Crossing out a column will give you points indicated by the value in the star at the bottom of the column. Completing rows or the up left diagonal, will give you a bonus. The blue section is similar to the yellow section, but both rows and columns give bonuses, and points are given by the number of squares crossed off. The specific values are given by the numbers at the top of the section. To cross off a square in the blue section, either the white or blue dice can be used. A square can be crossed off, if the sum of the blue and white dice equals that off the square. Who has the other dice is irrelevant, but the player in question must have one of them. The green section scores based on the number of squares crossed off. The leftmost square must be crossed off before the square to the right of it can be. A square can be crossed off if the green die's value is greater than, or equal to, that which is specified on the square. Once a square is crossed off, if a bonus is present underneath the square, it is unlocked. The number in the star above the rightmost crossed off square, is the number of points scored in that section. The orange section has the same restriction as the green section. The leftmost section must be crossed off first. However, the value of the dice is irrelevant. Any value of dice can be used to cross off any square, so long as all the squares to the left are filled. Points are given by the sum of the values of the dice. As such, the value of the orange die should be written instead of crossing out the square. Some squares have a score multiplier on them x2 or x3. This multiplies the value of the specific die roll that is used to fill in that square. Filling in a square also unlocks any bonuses beneath it. The purple section has the same restriction as the green section. The leftmost section must be crossed off first. The square to the right of the previous square can only be filled in by a purple die roll of greater value than the previous square. The exception is if the previous square is of value 6, in which case, the cycle resets, and any value can be used. Points are given by the sum of the dice used. Once a square is filled in, it unlocks a bonus if one exists below it. Each dice corresponds with a section of the same color, the exception is the white dice, which can be used for any section. There are 4 types of bonuses: foxes, X dice, +1s, and rerolls. Bonuses are either unlocked by filling in parts of sections, or at the start of the first 4 rounds. X dice are numbers of specified or unspecified value and color. They must be used immediately after acquisition. They can be used as dice rolls, and fill in a square. If their color or value is specified, then that color or value must be used. If it's unspecified, then anything goes. Rerolls allow the active player to roll the dice again. This does not affect the previous rolls, and any dice that have already been moved to the silver platter, or that are on the scorecard, are unaffected. This bonus can only be used by the active player, and must be used before they pick a dice for that roll. +1s allow any player to take another die at the end of a turn. They must use all of their regular dice first, which means the 3 dice for the active player, or the 1 dice from the silver platter for the passive players. This new die can be taken from anywhere, the scorecard or the silver platter. Taking it does not affect any other player, and the same die can be taken and used multiple times. +1s can be used multiple times per turn. Foxes are a score multiplier that are used at the end of the game for scoring. The lowest scoring section is multiplied by the number of foxes, and added as bonus points. +1s and rerolls can be tracked by filling in the outer circle in the sections at the top of the score sheet. When one is used, cross out the inner circle. If playing single player, you still take turns being the active and passive player. The active turn is as normal, but for the passive turn, all the dice are rolled, and the 3 lowest scoring dice are made available for the player to choose from. If multiple dice have the same value, and this prevents the player from taking the 3 lowest value dice, then choose the one closest to the silver platter. To score at the end of the game, find the points in each color section. Add them all up. Identify the lowest scoring section, and multiply it by the number of foxes, and add that number to the total. The player with the highest score wins.